Imagine the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in your bones, the kind that only comes after 2 years of wrestling steel and storms on an oil rig in the middle of the North Sea, where the waves look like moving mountains and the wind screams louder than your own thoughts, and all that keeps you sane is the singular, burning image of home. I'm talking about 40 acres of Georgia red clay that's been in my bloodline since before the ink dried on the history books, a patch of earth my grandmother, Nana Rose, bought with money she scrubbed off other people's floors in 1945. I hadn't been back in 24 months, just sending checks to the county tax office and dreaming of the day I'd fix up the old farmhouse, maybe get a few head of cattle, and finally breathe air that didn't taste like diesel and salt. So, picture my truck tires crunching onto the gravel of County Road 9, my heart racing with that almost home feeling, only to turn the corner and feel my brain short-circuit, because where Nana Rose's cornfields and wild blackberry bushes were supposed to be, there was civilization. I'm not talking about a shack or a squatter. I'm talking about a sprawling, manicured nightmare called Oakwood Reserve, complete with perfectly paved streets bearing names like Willow Way and Birch Boulevard, fire hydrants gleaming in the sun, and 120 identical beige houses sitting right on top of the soil my family bled for. There was a clubhouse with a sparkling blue pool sitting exactly, and I mean exactly, where my grandmother used to pluck her prize-winning tomatoes, and seeing kids riding bicycles over the ground where my ancestors were buried. It didn't just make me mad, it made the world stop spinning. I sat in my truck, the engine idling, watching a sprinkler system hiss water onto sod that didn't belong there, trying to process the sheer audacity of it, until I saw her, the architect of my misery, walking out of a white Mercedes like she owned the sunlight itself. This was Karen Sterling, the HOA president, a woman whose hair was sprayed so tight it could deflect bullets, pointing at a landscaping crew on my property with the entitlement of a queen addressing her subjects. I stepped out of my beat-up Ford, wearing grease-stained jeans and boots that had seen more of the world than she ever would, clutching the original deed in my hand like a weapon, and I approached her with the calm of a man who's stared down hurricanes. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, my voice raspy from disuse, "but I think there's a massive misunderstanding here, seeing as you've built a subdivision on my land." She looked at me over the rim of her sunglasses, scanning my rough hands and my tan, and she didn't see a landowner, she saw trash. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound, and told me, "Honey, this is Oakwood Reserve, a respectable community, and we don't buy whatever scam you're selling. So take your little piece of paper and get off my street before I call the sheriff." That was the moment the switch flipped, the moment I decided that I wasn't just going to sue them, I was going to dismantle their entire existence brick by brick. You see, these people looked at me and saw a simple laborer, a blue-collar nobody, but they didn't know that 15 years in international maritime logistics teaches you a hell of a lot about contracts, boundaries, and how to survive when the sharks are circling. I didn't scream, I didn't shout, I just walked back to my truck, drove to the old farmhouse, which was somehow still standing, now the rustic centerpiece of their neighborhood, and prepared for the most expensive game of chess Karen Sterling would ever lose. By the next morning, Karen had already fired the first shot, filing a restraining order that painted me as a transient drifter with a violent streak, a narrative she spun to the terrified residents of Oakwood Reserve during an emergency meeting, claiming I was a con artist trying to shake down honest families. Her husband, Councilman Sterling, a local politician with a smile like a used car salesman, had apparently greased the wheels, fast-tracking zoning permits and retroactively approving a subdivision that shouldn't exist, essentially rewriting history to cover their tracks. But while they were playing local politics, I was playing 4D chess, hiring Miller and Sons Surveying, the most feared land surveyors in the state, who came out with military-grade GPS equipment and confirmed what I already knew in my gut. Every single house, every manicured lawn, every inch of that clubhouse was sitting illegally on Sullivan family land. Here's the kicker, the detail that made my lawyer actually whistle when he saw it. The developer, Summit Builders, had filed their permits using a completely fabricated survey, literally making up coordinates, and the lawyer who signed off on those fraudulent documents was none other than Karen Sterling herself, back when she was just a greedy attorney looking for a payday. When the judge demanded she prove standing for her restraining order by showing a clear title to the land, she folded like a cheap lawn chair, because you can't produce a title for land you stole, especially when the rightful owner has been paying property taxes from the middle of the ocean for 5 years straight. A little fact about adverse possession that these geniuses forgot to check. With the restraining order tossed, I went on the offensive, not with violence, but with vinyl. I spent a few $100 printing massive banners that read, "Welcome to Sullivan Family Land, private property," strung them up on the fence posts right at the entrance of their pristine neighborhood, and then I dropped the nuclear option. I posted notices on every single front door demanding $50 a day in usage rent for trespassing on my property, including a QR code for payment. You can imagine the chaos, the suburban panic, the way the neighborhood Facebook group imploded as residents turned on Karen, realizing their American dream was built on a foundation of lies, and real estate agents started fleeing the area like rats sensing an earthquake. Karen tried to rally the troops, holding a hysterical meeting at the VFW hall because the clubhouse was now technically a crime scene in the eyes of the residents, and she stood there promising to crush me, to drive me out, calling me a danger to our children. I was sitting in my truck outside, listening to the whole thing on a live stream provided by a sympathetic neighbor, recording every slanderous word, every lie, every admission of guilt, because in my line of work, you document everything or you die. She escalated, hiring a slimy private investigator named Grimm to dig up dirt on me, hoping to find a criminal record or a secret family, but all he found was a decorated Navy service record and 15 years of impeccable work history. So she pivoted to pure evil, filing a petition to have me declared mentally incompetent, trying to use the state to lock me up so she could steal my land by default. But she made one fatal error, the kind arrogance always makes. She forgot that in small towns, secretaries run the world. Mrs. Higgins, the county clerk who had been playing bridge with Nana Rose since the Eisenhower administration, invited me over for tea and handed me a stack of photocopied documents that she wasn't supposed to have. Documents that showed Councilman Sterling receiving consulting fees from Summit Builders totaling nearly $2 million. She showed me the smoking gun, the backdated permits, the falsified environmental reports, and the recorded minutes of meetings where they openly discussed handling the Sullivan issue while I was overseas. Armed with this, I didn't just sue them. I invoked RICO statutes, alleging a criminal conspiracy between the Sterlings, the construction company, and corrupt county officials, freezing their assets and turning their world upside down. Karen tried to run, getting caught near the state line with a trunk full of cash, and Summit Builders declared bankruptcy faster than you can blink, transferring their assets to a shell company. But I was already 2 steps ahead, tracking the money with forensic accountants I knew from the oil industry. The HOA board, in a panic, tried to levy a $15,000 special assessment on the homeowners to fight my lawsuit, which was the equivalent of pouring gasoline on a forest fire, causing a full-blown mutiny where neighbors were practically sharpening pitchforks to go after Karen. Just when I thought I had them cornered, things got dangerous, because a cornered animal bites. Karen's son, Kyle, a spoiled brat with a criminal justice degree and zero common sense, started a campaign of terror, vandalizing my barn, spray painting slurs on Nana Rose's farmhouse, and planting stolen HOA equipment on my porch to frame me for theft. The local sheriff, Chief Miller, a golf buddy of the councilman, showed up ready to arrest me, his handcuffs already out, until I calmly handed him a USB drive with 4K footage of Kyle committing the crimes, footage from the military-grade security cameras I'd installed the day I got back. I looked the chief in the eye and said, "You can either arrest the kid, or you can explain to the FBI why you're an accessory to a federal conspiracy." And watching the color drain from his face was the first time I actually smiled in weeks. The sun was setting over the chaotic sprawl of Oakwood Reserve, casting long, jagged shadows over the battlefield. But the real war was just getting started because, in the midst of preparing my legal arsenal, I uncovered a detail that shifted the tectonic plates of the entire conflict. Buried deep in the dusty archives of the State Geological Survey, attached to Nana Rose's original deed, was a clause about mineral rights, specifically, that the Sullivan family retained 100% ownership of everything beneath the topsoil. It turns out, my humble 40 acres wasn't just dirt. It was sitting directly on top of a massive natural gas pocket, a geological anomaly worth upwards of $50 million, which suddenly explained why Summit Builders and the Sterlings were so desperate to steal this specific patch of worthless farmland. But the rabbit hole went deeper, spiraling into pure criminality, because I found a 99-year extraction lease signed by me. Or rather, a version of me with a shaky hand and a pen, a forgery so blatant it was almost insulting, authorizing a company called Apex Energy to drill, fracture, and pipe gas right out from under the subdivision. Karen Sterling, utilizing her law firm as a front, had forged my signature, collected a $10 million advance royalty payment, and laundered it through her husband's shell companies, all while knowing that the pipeline easements would legally require tearing up half the backyards in Oakwood Reserve, utterly destroying whatever property value remained. I didn't call the police. I called Apex Energy's corporate headquarters, got their general counsel on the line, and calmly explained that they were currently trespassing on federal land, operating under a forged contract, and that they had about 24 hours to decide if they wanted to be defendants in a RICO case or my new best friends. You've never seen corporate suits move faster. Within 3 days, the fraudulent lease was shredded, and I had a new contract sitting on my table. A 50% royalty rate, a $20 million signing bonus, and absolute veto power over where they drilled. I made sure the new deal stipulated that Apex would join my legal team as a plaintiff against the Sterlings to recover their stolen funds, adding a billion-dollar corporation's legal department to my side of the fight. When the news hit the neighborhood, it was like a bomb went off. Half the residents blamed me for bringing an industrial operation to their doorstep, while the other half finally realized Karen had sold them down the river, planning to turn their suburban paradise into a gas field without them seeing a dime. The tension in the air was so thick you could taste the ozone. Families turning on families, the community fracturing into Team Sully and Team Sterling, until Karen, desperate and unraveling, called a mandatory safety meeting at the clubhouse, trying to spin the narrative one last time. I walked into that meeting like a ghost, interrupting her speech, and handed her an eviction notice in front of 200 people, announcing, "Get off my property. Karen, you have 30 days to vacate before I bulldoze this clubhouse." The room erupted, a cacophony of shouting and panic, but the real dagger came from Mrs. Higgins, who had been quietly compiling a dossier of evidence in her basement. She led me down to her cellar, past jars of pickled peaches, to a filing cabinet that contained the lost minutes from a secret county commission meeting held 2 years prior, proving that Councilman Sterling and Karen had planned this entire scheme, dubbed Project Optimus, to systematically target land owned by deployed military personnel and elderly shut-ins across 3 counties. This wasn't just about my land. It was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar enterprise of theft, involving bribed judges, paid-off inspectors, and a systematic inflating of HOA fees to fund their political ambitions. I reached out to my cousin, Mike, an investigative journalist in Atlanta who had been waiting for a story like this his entire career, and we began dropping truth bombs in the Sunday paper, exposing the rural land grab scandal. The series detailed everything: the shell companies, the intimidation tactics, the fact that Karen had been impersonating me on phone calls with federal regulators, a felony that carries serious prison time. But as the walls closed in, the Sterlings didn't surrender. They went scorched earth. It started with a fire at the county records office, a mysterious electrical failure that just happened to incinerate the physical property files for the last 5 years, but they didn't know Mrs. Higgins had digital backups on 3 different hard drives. Then, they tried to destroy my character, paying a disgruntled ex-employee of mine, a guy named Danny who I'd fired for drinking on the rig, to go on local TV and claim I was a violent psychopath. But the idiot contradicted himself so many times the reporter actually cut the interview short. When the media smear failed, the physical attacks began: my truck tires slashed, windows smashed, threats painted on my driveway. But I had Marcus, an old buddy from my maritime security days, running counter-surveillance on the property. The breaking point, the moment that turned this from a legal battle into a blood feud, happened on a Tuesday night when I let my dog, Buster, out for his evening run. I found him foaming at the mouth, convulsing near the fence line where someone had thrown raw hamburger meat laced with antifreeze. I rushed him to the vet, speeding like a maniac, my hands shaking on the wheel, praying to a god I hadn't spoken to in years. And as I watched the vet pump his stomach, saving his life by a margin of minutes. A cold, dark rage settled in my chest. This wasn't about land anymore. They tried to kill my dog, the only family I had left in that house, and for that, I was going to bury them. I discovered that the thugs they hired were off-duty deputies from the neighboring county, moonlighting for a security firm owned by Councilman Sterling's brother, proving the corruption was a web that spanned the entire state. I called the FBI field office, not the local tip line, but a direct contact I had through Apex Energy, and invoked the witness intimidation statutes, bringing federal heat down on Clayton County. Agents swarmed the area, monitoring my farm 24/7, and the harassment stopped instantly, replaced by the terrifying silence of a looming indictment. Karen tried to flee again, caught by TSA at the Atlanta airport with vacuum-sealed cash hidden in shampoo bottles, while her husband collapsed from a heart attack when the feds kicked down his front door, though it looked more like a panic attack to me. The most satisfying part was listening to the wiretaps the FBI played for me, hearing Karen's voice go from arrogant to shrill, confessing to everything, admitting she targeted me because she thought dumb oil workers wouldn't notice the paperwork. She was about to find out just how much this dumb worker noticed. Desperation is a funny thing. It makes smart people do incredibly stupid things, and Karen Sterling was about to commit the blunder of the century. Facing inevitable prison time and total financial ruin, she concocted a Hail Mary plan so diabolical it sounded like fiction. She called an emergency vote to force the HOA members to buy the entire development from a shell company she secretly controlled for $25 million, intending to cash out and vanish before the indictments dropped. She didn't know that the federal magistrate handling the asset forfeiture was Judge Morrison, a man whose sister had lost her farm in a similar scheme years ago, and the moment she tried to execute the transfer, he froze every single bank account associated with Oakwood Reserve. But she wasn't done. She sent her son Kyle and two of his frat brothers to my property at 3 a.m. with gasoline cans, intending to burn Nana Rose's farmhouse to the ground with me sleeping inside. What they didn't account for was Marcus's thermal imaging sensors, which picked them up like glowing ghosts in the darkness. I watched from my monitor, coffee in hand, as the FBI tactical team that had been staking out the woods emerged from the tree line, tackling them before they could even strike a match. Seeing Kyle crying for his mother while being handcuffed face down in the dirt was a grim sort of justice, the kind that leaves a metallic taste in your mouth. The endgame arrived in a packed county courthouse, the air thick with the smell of sweat and anxiety, as hundreds of victims from across the state gathered to see the fall of the Sterling Empire. Karen, out on bail but wearing an ankle monitor, took the stand in a last-ditch effort to sway public opinion, crying crocodile tears about government overreach and pointing a trembling finger at me, screaming that I was an outsider destroying a community. That's when the prosecutor played the tape, the recording where she laughed about targeting soldiers overseas, calling them easy marks, and mocking the family she evicted. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and crushing. I walked to the podium, looking out at the faces of the people who had hated me, the neighbors who had feared me, and I said, "You aren't my enemies. You're just pawns in her game." My grandmother, Nana Rose, believed that land is supposed to feed people, not destroy them. I announced right then and there that I was using the mineral rights settlement, $80 million, to establish the Rose Sullivan Community Trust. The gasp in the room was audible. I explained that the trust would pay for the legal fees to clear everyone's titles, fund scholarships for every child in the neighborhood, and turn the disputed land into a community asset. Karen was led away in handcuffs, screaming threats that echoed off the marble walls. But nobody was listening anymore. The spell was broken. She got 15 years federal, her husband got 10, and the executives at Summit Builders rolled on everyone to save their own skins, exposing a corruption ring that spanned 12 counties. 6 months later, I'm standing on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sun dip below the tree line. The nightmare of Oakwood Reserve has transformed. The clubhouse is now a community center. The pool is open to everyone, and where the decorative, useless grass used to be, there are 40 raised garden beds where residents are growing their own vegetables. The Rose Sullivan Trust has already sent a dozen kids to college, including the daughter of the woman who used to run the Anti-Sully Facebook page. I didn't tear down the houses. That would have just created more victims. Instead, We integrated them, blending the old farm with the new reality, creating a strange, beautiful hybrid of rural grit and suburban hope. I can hear kids laughing in the distance, and for the first time in 2 years, the wind smells sweet, like pine needles and damp earth, not deceit. But as I sit here, drinking coffee from Nana Rose's old mug, I can't help but ask myself the question that keeps me up at night. I once sure. The bad guys are in jail, the money is doing good, and the land is safe. But was it justice? Is it truly justice when you have to become a monster to fight monsters? When you have to threaten, surveil, and destroy lives just to keep what's yours? The system didn't save me. I saved me, using money and connections that most people don't have. If I hadn't found that gas, if I hadn't had the money to fight, Karen Sterling would still be queen, and I'd be just another homeless veteran. So tell me, is the system broken, or is it working exactly the way it was designed, protecting only those who can afford to buy the sword? Look at your own deed. Check your own rights. Because in this world, nobody gives you anything. You have to take it, hold it, and sometimes you have to burn the whole world down just to protect the patch of dirt you call home. What would you have done? Would you have taken the check and walked away? Or would you have stayed and fought the war? Let me know, because the next Karen Sterling is already out there, planning her next move, and she might be looking at your neighborhood right now.